With us now from Capitol Hill, Chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Mark Meadows. Congressman, great to have you with us. We're just trying to clarify one thing here. The top rate right now for individual earners is 39%. Does that stay at 39 or does that drop to 35%?
You know, Joe, we discussed that very thing yesterday. I think there's a real push by the administration to keep that top rate where it is and not bring it down. I know in the framework it talked about 35%. I think those decisions will probably be made in the coming days as we look at that top bracket.
Just so for people that don't know the history of it, it was at 35%. Barack Obama got it pushed up to 39%. So that's 39% is the Obama rate that you guys are going to try to figure out what you're going to do with.
Well, and Joe, as you know, I mean, you've been here on Capitol Hill. You know how it goes back and forth. The negotiations are continuing. But I can tell you, without sharing anything in terms of personal conversations with the president, I did witness on this very thing. He is very firm about making sure that the rich don't get a break at the expense of the hardworking American taxpayer. And so as we look at that top bracket, there is a good chance that we'll address that in the coming days, and it could very well stay in place.
Okay. Let's move on to, I would say very good, but for the fact I live in Connecticut and pay 55% tax rate. But I'm
hold on. This is breaking news, Joe.
I'm a happy guy.
Joe,
I'm very lucky.
This is Joe saying that we need to give a break for the 1%ers?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying I pay 55%.
I agree.
Totally fine
I think
with
it
that.
needs to come down for everybody. I agree.
I'm sure there are a lot of people, though, who are probably small business owners who can't afford to pay that 55%.
Right. Well said.
So there are two things that obviously as conservatives and that at least I've always been concerned about, and I'm sure you're concerned about. There's always a balance. We want to lower the tax rate as much as possible, let people keep as much of their money that they earned as possible. But on the other side of that, always has to be a concern about the deficit and the national debt that's gone from $4 trillion under Clinton to $11 trillion under Bush to $20 trillion under Obama. Now it looks like it'll be $35 trillion under Donald Trump. How do you cut taxes without blowing a hole in the deficit?
Well, obviously, that's the discussion of today is what are we going to do, and this whole discussion for your viewers about neutral, really it comes down to that question about the deficit. One of the principles that many of the conservatives espouse to is as you lower that rate, what you get is actually greater economic growth, and that GDP growth will make up for much of the deficit. You may get a deficit in the short run, but you can make a very compelling case that over the next 15 years, if we're really aggressive and bold on reducing these tax rates, not only for individuals, but for small businesses and corporations, that what you can do, as long as you don't grow the government along with that, is balance over a 15-year period. So for me, I'm trying to look at it much like a mom or dad would look with their 30-year mortgage. As long as we have a plan to pay it off over a longer period of time, I think that that's fiscally responsible. But we do know that we're not going to get out of this deficit or 20 trillion, 30 trillion, whatever it is, deficit area on an anemic economic growth of 1.8. We've got to get it to 3% or better. I believe that that's what the president's plan is all about, and we certainly are embracing it wholeheartedly. As you know, we took an official position yesterday to support the budget to start this process in earnest.
Congressman Meadows, this is Josh Earnest here. The other balance that has to be struck is one between trying to get this done quickly, and obviously there's a political incentive for congressional Republicans to try to demonstrate some progress on this issue. On the other hand, there's also a commitment to running an open process, a formal process that goes through committee where potentially you could build some bipartisan support. How do you strike that balance appropriately, and what is a fair timeline that, or what do you think is the ideal timeline for striking that balance?
Well, Josh, it's good to see you on that side of the desk instead of on this side. But as we look at that, that balance is hopefully been taking place over the 9 months in terms to work and get some input. But in terms of the bipartisan side of that, I think what you'll see in the Ways and Means Committee on the House side over the month of October is some real back and forth. There already have been discussions, I know, between the administration and key senators and House members on the Democratic side to try to put it together. But we don't have much time. The American people, as you know, are fed up with excuses. They want us to actually deliver and put something on the president's desk. And tax cuts is something that doesn't have a D or an R behind it, and unaffiliated voters like it just as well when you put more of their money back in their pocket. And so we've got to do it. We have a timeline of hopefully having something on the president's desk by Thanksgiving, but certainly no later than the end of the year.
Congressman, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you this morning on a different issue. As you may have heard, there was a race in Alabama settled on Tuesday night. I'm curious to know if you think that Roy Moore, should he win the general election, would be a good addition to the Congress.
Well, I think the Alabama voter is the one who decides that. Obviously, we had a personal choice in that, bringing forth Judge Roy Moore. But that was more an indication of the frustration that I was just talking about with Josh. There's a frustration of said, get something done. And so that overwhelming victory for Judge Roy Moore was more a pushback against Mitch McConnell and the fact that they failed on a number of campaign promises to deliver something to the president's desk. And so as we look at that, he'll make a good senator. I do believe that he'll win in December, and ultimately the people of Alabama will have a voice here on Capitol Hill. We need to turn Capitol Hill back to its rightful owner, and that's we the people. And sadly, so many times members of the House and Senate forget that.
You say he'll be a good senator. Are you comfortable with some of the views he's espoused as recently as a couple of weeks ago on the campaign trail? President Obama's birthplace, for example, his views on Muslims, his views on homosexuality?
Well, obviously, there are a lot of things that get said by different candidates. I have to worry hard enough about what I say versus anybody else saying it. You know, when we look at a litmus test for a religious liberty test or a religious test for anything, I'm not in favor of that. And so we differ on some of our views on some of those key elements. But really, the people of Alabama want to make sure that there is someone in the Senate that represents their view and willing to listen. I think Judge Roy Moore is one of those who's willing to do that. He's shown that over and over again.
You're happy to have him in the Senate, then?
Well, I'm certainly supporting him and happy to have him in the Senate. Yes, Willie.
So, Congressman, I want to finish where I began with you. So, like I said, I'm a lucky guy. If I don't want to pay 55% in taxes, I can move to Florida. I can do the show from Florida, or I can do whatever.
Well, it wouldn't be the same, Joe. Come on now.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I know.
I'd go with you.
It'd be a lot warmer, and it'd be a lot cheaper because I'd be paying 35% or 39% in taxes.
Right.
But there are a lot of people that are stuck in states like Connecticut, Illinois, New York State, California,
New Jersey,
that are small business owners that work their tails off, and they literally have to work for over half the year to pay back the government on all levels for, taxes, fees. You add it all up.
Right.
How does this bill help small business owners in those blue states? Because all we've heard is bad news, which is they're not going to be able to deduct their state income taxes. So these small business owners, unlike me, just can't up and move. They're stuck there with their business. How does this bill bring down their tax bill?
Well, Joe, I'm glad you asked, because I was a small business guy before I got here, and we have been myopically focused on what we do for just those people. And so part of this framework that was rolled out yesterday had two key components. It made sure that we lowered from that 39.5% rate for the small business owner down to no greater than 25%. So a huge tax deduction. The other part of that is we got rid of the alternative minimum tax. And you know what that is, but it basically says you always have to pay the higher tax. So those two things alone should be unbelievably good news for the small business guy, whether they're in Connecticut or whether they're in North Carolina or in California or in between.
All right, Congressman Mark.